in Line podcast, where we are helping to prepare you for whatever is next in line. As always, I'm your host, Chance Pitts, and I would like to thank you for tuning in to this episode. Guys, instead of the typical way I start housekeeping, I would like to start by saying thank you. Thank you to everybody who is actively listening to the podcast as it comes out. Thank you to everyone who has left a rating or review. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed and who has told their friends about us as well. It has been huge. It has moved us in the right direction. We've actually hit a milestone of 500 downloads. It doesn't seem like a whole lot, but that's just on our podcast review setting on our feed. We've also launched on a couple different platforms that don't factor into that, so we're actually a bit higher than that. But that's a pretty good factor for only doing this a couple of months. I think we're moving in the right direction for sure, and that is 100% attributed to y'all's efforts. Thank you so much. I encourage you to continue to share this with people who you think it can help. I encourage you to share the things on social media that you see and you like from us. That's at Next in Line Development on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and especially on TikTok now. We're throwing some content out there that doesn't make it all the way around and getting some good feedback on that kind of stuff. But guys, overall, just thank you. And guys, we find ourselves here on another Thursday for a thoughtful Thursday here at Next in Line. And what I want to talk about with y'all today is a tool that I actively put in my toolbox all the time. I actively tried to put this tool in anyone I work with or anyone I train's toolbox as well, no matter the situation. Now, typically this is something that works better for a business application, but it is applicable across the board. So because it fits into that groove of business, we're going to talk about it in that aspect at first. So that tool that I'm speaking of is called moving liability. Now, we always talk about extreme ownership and owning your situation, taking responsibility for the issues at hand, for your team's shortcomings and all those things. And that's very, very important. That's a style of leadership, and that is a tool that's been coined by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. They talk about it a lot. It's very important, very, very good move, and while moving liability might seem like it falls on the other end of the scale from that, I encourage you to think about it in a different light. It goes hand in hand with taking ownership, because by taking ownership of your domain, taking ownership of your situation, that is effectively how you move liability. There is only two ways to completely avoid liability in a situation, and that is to not get involved at all or to do your job so impeccably well that nothing can come back on you. Nothing can be your issue. And if it is, the fact that you do your job and you own it so well all the time typically makes it easier to forgive you if you do make a minimal mistake or even a large mistake. It's a coachable moment rather than a disciplinary action that you receive. So guys, with moving liability, what I want to talk to y'all about as an example is that I used to be a manager for a branch of a heavy equipment rental service in Southeast Texas. If you haven't listened to the first episode of the podcast, I encourage you to go listen to that after this. It gives you my full background, kind of why I am doing what I'm doing with Next in Line, and the overall goal of the movement. So now that I've got that little advertisement out of the way, let's get back into the process of moving liability within this rental branch with heavy equipment. So guys, I would always train this tool into the inside sales reps that I worked with whenever I traveled around from branch to branch across the region, and specifically at my location in Freeport and Angleton. And the reason I did this is because an ISR, an inside sales rep, is someone who has a lot of power and a lot of weight on their shoulders for a position that is an entry-level position. Now, this person is typically someone who comes out of college. They're 22, 23, 24 years old, and they are responsible for making sure that all of the logistics and all of the steps and precautions are made for getting expensive equipment, heavy equipment, out to job sites for our customers. Now, you're talking about customers that spend millions of dollars a year with a rental company. Now, you're talking also about machines that can cost anywhere from a few $100 up to several $100,000. The standard most popular mid-size excavator that was rented out by that company costs $243,000 whenever you consider the replacement value for that machine if anything happens to it. Now, the things that an inside sales rep were responsible for was making sure that the right machine was put in line to be made ready or found for the rental with the right attachments, the right implements, the right size bucket. Make sure that it has a plate on the bucket if they were digging in some sort of sensitive area inside of a plant or underground utilities or anything like that if there was a risk, but also making sure that if they needed teeth, they could break through whatever they were digging with teeth as well. And it played a huge factor. But also they were responsible for getting a credit release. They had to provide accurate information to our credit department so that the credit department could decide whether that person was capable of renting that machine and paying for it, and if they would actually pay for it. Now, along with that, they had to check insurance documents to make sure that if something came out of the blue and happened to this machine, there was some sort of liability moved onto either the customer's insurance or the customer signed a liability waiver taking responsibility for that machine. Either way, it was moving the liability with the insurance. And guys, whenever one of these things broke down, you lost one of three things within the company, or with the customer, I should say. You lost either time, you lost money, or you lost trust, which potentially led to lost customers. And if you're in business, if you're an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur, you know that these things being lost and those relationships being tarnished has a detrimental effect. It travels very fast in industry through word of mouth whenever you screw something up. Not so much whenever you get something right, but whenever you do mess up, it moves around very, very quickly. And guys, with these liabilities, like I just talked about right off the bat, if the wrong machine is ordered and it goes to the job site because the inside sales rep messes up, if the wrong bucket is on that machine, you've got a situation where a customer's cost thousands and thousands of dollars because they are waiting in a very specific job site for a very specific machine so they can do a very specific job. And you're not just talking about some guy sitting in a field with nothing else to do besides maybe hop on the plow. No, we're talking about heavy industrial. We're talking about customers that spend millions and millions and millions of dollars a year. We're talking about government entities, production plants, chemical plants, all these very, very important and meticulous places to get into had to have specific things so they didn't waste time, they didn't waste money, and they didn't break that trust that they were working to build with everybody that they had around them. So guys, this inside sales position had a ton of responsibility. They were the gatekeepers for all of these things in a lot of ways, and that's a lot of pressure to put on somebody that young in the industry. So I coached them. I said, move the liability. Make sure 100% you are doing your job to the best of your ability so that if an issue does come up, you can solve it easily. Because if you take care of business on all fronts like that and you have everything in the direction it needs to go, whenever one problem does arise over here to the right, you can put it down and you can figure it out. That way you're not fighting something on the left or over here in the center as you're trying to fix that one problem. You've got everything under control that you can. You move the responsibility of the credit release onto the credit department to make sure that that customer is good. But also, if the customer shows up early and there's no credit release, you can honestly say with a paper trail, hey, I sent that off to the credit department and they just haven't gotten back with me. We're waiting on them. And you can apply pressure to them, and that liability is not on you. With the insurance thing, we had machines go out without insurance before that ended up buried in water and mud. We had machines get stolen. We had machines get struck by lightning and have major electrical issues, and also one get burnt to the ground. That was a very particularly expensive unit. And we've also had things as boneheaded as somebody putting the wrong fluids in the wrong place and costing themselves $30,000. And those machines sometimes left without insurance. And it was a tough situation. Whenever that happens, there's one person that's liable for that. The person who was the gatekeeper, the inside sales rep, the 23-year-old, who did not have the affairs in order with the insurance like they were supposed to. So as a person with that much liability on you, I always encourage my team and my inside sales reps to move the liability as best they can to other people to mitigate any harm coming their way. It also made it a lot easier to accept and forgive whenever an issue did come up, because typically if they go out of their way to be successful on a daily basis and own everything within their domain through extreme ownership, but also through moving liability, it is something that is easier to understand whenever a mistake is made, because you see that person as somebody who genuinely tries and genuinely cares about what they are doing. And while we've talked about business very regularly in this situation, you can apply this moving liability directly to a lot of other situations in your life. Guys, with your marriage, if you're having financial issues, if there's issues with infidelity, if there's issues around the house with you not doing something and your wife getting mad, or vice versa, then you can fix these things. You can prevent all of these problems in your life by taking extreme ownership, but moving the liability. You can own everything within your domain. You can do whatever you can to solve the problems ahead of time so that, like I said, whenever a little problem arises, it's a small problem and you can fix it quickly. You don't have these big knockdown, drag out arguments and these relationship ending fights with your significant other, because you're able to own the situation. You're able to move that liability, and it's not going to be your fault whenever something's not done, because you've already done it. It's not a factor anymore. Now, along with that, you can apply the same logic to your fitness and going to the gym. And along with that, let's roll in the morning routine. If you get your gym bag prepped early, if you lay out all of your supplements you're going to take, if you plan your workouts ahead of time, what you're doing is you are moving liability. You're less liable to skip a day at the gym. And whenever you're less likely to skip a day at the gym, you're putting in the work, so you want to see the results, you're less likely to miss your diet. And that's all with just being prepared. You're not going to put a cheat meal in the middle of that to screw everything up if you plan your meals out, if you pack your lunch ahead of time, if you move the liability forward. You don't give yourselves the opportunity to screw up or for it to be on you, because you have an out. You have a reason to be successful rather than a reason to break your diet, or a reason to not work out, or a reason to not get up to your alarm clock. Guys, you can also apply this to getting your kids to baseball or softball, whatever it is, getting your organization, your schedule going with your kids and making sure that you have everything you need. If you lay out all the baseball stuff or softball stuff, make sure it's all in there or have them do it. If you pack the Gatorades in the cooler, if you do everything in your power to make sure that you get them there on time and that you're preparing ahead of time and coming up with a plan, what you're genuinely doing is you're moving the liability down the road. If they don't have a good practice, or if something goes wrong and you don't get them there on time, it's not going to be from lack of trying. It's not going to be from the effort. And I will guarantee you that the consistency of which you get them there on time or even early will increase. You'll become that person who is responsible, that everyone can count on to actually be there and show up. You'll be that parent that is Johnny on the spot ahead of time. And guys, also with that, if you're taking classes right now with high school or college or whatever, if you move your liability off of yourself to screw up, you prepare, you study, you're making yourself less liable to fail the test. You're making yourself more likely to pass. You're creating habits to become the kind of person who is successful in the classroom, the kind of person who doesn't procrastinate and waste time, who doesn't put off assignments to go do other things and fill their time with things that are less than healthy for you mentally, spiritually, physically, whatever realm you might find yourself in. Guys, also, let's just think about a common one around here, drinking and driving. if you move that liability by making sure that you've got things in place. If you're going out somewhere and you're going to drink, come up with a plan ahead of time. Don't take your keys and expect to drive to the house. That's not something that seems like it's very good whenever we're talking about moving liability. Let's talk about planning ahead with a sober driver, making sure you have an Uber, becoming the kind of person that does those things and thinks ahead to move the liability down the line, because the likelihood of you being involved in a bad situation due to alcohol and vehicles significantly decreases whenever you take ownership of the situation and you move the liability over to a different situation, someone who's more able to control the situation because they're sober or they're able to drive. And guys, the examples with that are endless. But I guarantee you, if you take this tool of moving the liability and you take ownership of your domain, then every single situation you find yourself in is going to become much, much more controllable. It removes the need for becoming a victim or having that victimhood mentality. It removes the unnecessary anxiety in your life. It removes the unnecessary stress in your life from uncertainty and from all the things that are outside of your control if you grasp the things that are in your control to move the liability off of you. And guys, I'm not saying this, like I said, I'm not saying this to dodge responsibility. I'm not saying to not take ownership. That is not what we're doing here. We are moving the liability of a screw up or a mess up or anything going wrong further down the line or to somewhere else. A different factor has to contribute to it that you didn't think about or that is not in your control. And then it's a completely different story. You can react accordingly with things that are within your control. So guys, get out there and take ownership by moving liability around in your domain. Because life is much, much more enjoyable whenever you use tools like this and you go out and win. Guys, thank y'all for tuning into this episode of the Next in Line podcast. As always, make sure you're sharing this with other people. Make sure you're leaving us a rating or review on whatever platform you're listening to. Subscribe to us. Check us out on social media. That's at Next in Line Development on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And always be prepared for whatever is next in line.